Hey, Duke, how are you? It's great to have you here.
I'm doing well. It's good to see you again, man.
Listen, thank you so much for taking your time out of the day. I know this is you're a busy, busy man. I've been reading what you've been doing. Thank you for taking your time to share your knowledge with all these young people and with me mainly that's listening to you right now. Um, the audience kind of already knows what you do. I've introduced you, but why don't you tell them a bit about your story and how you arrived where you are today?
Man, if I knew how I got here, I kind of go with the flow. I think if doors open and what's on the other side looks intriguing, you should walk through. I originally started in producing the news, political news, and enjoyed that, particularly the production. But politics is kind of nasty. And so I ultimately left that and went back to school, got an MFA in film, worked in movies for many years, primarily with the CEO of Focus Features when they were sort of at their heyday, which was cool. And through working with them, and in particular the marketing of movies, I saw or was exposed to advertising. And it became clear to me that advertising was really where ground is broken. It's where real innovation happens, real creativity happens. And so I started producing TV spots and then got into all the rest of it and ultimately built a company that specialized in luxury brands and uh, teaching at SCAD. And here I am.
Nice. So basically, your trajectory had different like you went into different creative routes along the way, and I want to get to that into that a bit later. But you mentioned that you also started a company and it's called greenhill+partners, right?
Correct.
um Now I read that your company did something that very few other agencies did and maybe none other did at that time, which is you managed to convince high-end brands like Chanel, Swarovski to go from a traditional type of media and advertising and go into like digital, mobile, and sort of more technological side of advertising. How did you manage typically traditional brands to do that? Because I know that that was a big scare. Nobody wanted to market to people on Instagram. How did you manage this to convince these brands to trust that this was going to work?
Yeah, I mean, it was scary is the right word for them. They were luxury brands were all, for the most part, terrified to go into digital media, particularly social media, because it's democratic, right? I mean, everyone has access, everyone can comment, everyone can be involved, and sort of in the co-creation of a brand. And a luxury brand is defined by the opposite of that, right? It's exclusivity. In all fairness, I don't know how much convincing I did. I think luxury brands ultimately saw the writing on the wall. You either get on the boat or the boat leaves you.
Yeah.
Um, and there were other agencies doing this at the time, and or trying to convince them at the time. And what I really did was sort of I noticed there was a gap. Here are agencies who are willing, ready, capable to take luxury brands online in a fruitful way, an effective way without mitigating their exclusivity. And then here are luxury brands who are afraid to do it, and they needed a middleman to sort of help them, to consult them, to help them figure out how to handle, how to work with the agency, how to make sure their interests were preserved. And so I started consulting with luxury brands first about how to engage an agency, and then ultimately they said, I don't remember who the first one was, but someone said, "Well, why don't we just work with you?" And I said, "Why don't you? That's a good idea." And it went from there.
So obviously the luxury market has changed over the last 10 years and in the last year alone where the whole world has changed. How do luxury brands approach this sort of global change where not everyone can, it's still exclusive, not everyone can afford them, but how do they market? How do luxury brands send the correct message throughout a global crisis like that? Because you cannot just say, hey, buy my $10,000 so and so or my 100,000 so and so without being sensitive about it.
Yeah, with crises like this, there's a certain level of I don't know, sympathy or crises bring us all together, right? I mean, we see that after something terrible happens. I always think about 9/11, a big crisis that was in my backyard. And while it was terrible, the beautiful thing was watching New Yorkers, this city where everyone's yelling at each other and honking, suddenly come together. And luxury brands, to some degree, are devoid of those sorts of values and feelings typically, because it's not exclusive. It's not, high end. I'm not saying luxury. I mean, empathy isn't high end. I'm just saying that's not the value they lead with. The good thing is that most people who purchase luxury goods were not as deeply as affected financially as others were, and so that spending, for the most part, continues. But you have to add to whatever messaging you're doing as a luxury brand this sense that it's not us and then the rest of the world anymore. It's all of us together. And one way, the primary way they do that is to leverage aspiration, right? To situate themselves still high on the podium, on the pedestal, but to, in a sort of friendly, empathetic way, invite people to strive to climb up and join them.
So do you see luxury brands sticking around for longer, or what do you think is going to happen to the hot market in the world as the years progress?
There will always be, whatever we call them, luxury brands, premium brands, upmarket.
Yeah.
Those will always exist because there will always be. It's human nature, right? To look up, to look out, and say, "That's where I want to go. That's where I want to be." And wherever there is that desire, there will be someone ready and willing to sell things. Um, so yeah, they'll always be there. It'll change. It always does. With the advent of digital media, like we were just talking about, they changed drastically. But here they are.
In this industry, undoubtedly, having a good presentation and being good at pitching and being good at representing not only your brand but yourself to the brand, um, it's an important skill that a lot of us lack. And when I mean a lot of us, I mean highly creative people that love to focus on the art but don't love to focus on the side of selling their art. So what does a good presentation or a pitch need, and how can people like me that are highly creative use those communication skills to their advantage?
Well, I've seen you present, and so I'm not sure it's fair to say us. You're a pretty darn good presenter.
Thank you.
Um, but it just needs to be. It's a mindset to me. People need to think. Creatives need to think of selling their ideas as just part of the gig. If a tree falls in the woods and no one hears it, all of that BS, which isn't BS, it's true. A great idea that never gets an audience, that never gets someone behind it to realize it, isn't a great idea. Um, Selling is 90% of it a lot of the time. When I left the big agency world, at that time we were, as an executive, I was about 90% of my time was spent business development, pitching, going to clients, taking them to dinner, and about 10% of it was spent as creative director, actually dealing with the work. Um, if you have a great idea, the only way to realize it is to get a team behind you. There's too much to do. It's a collaborative business. And so pitching, selling, public speaking, at least enough design know how to know when you're looking at an ugly deck and a pretty one is essential. It's just part of it. The same way a copywriter has to know how to write good copy, a copywriter has to know how to present well. Period.
And do you think that this is changing right now since face to face interaction is a bit more limited? Like, especially where I'm from in Illinois, I cannot see many people, and you're starting to work remotely, and the relationships that you build over camera are still somewhat different than you build them when you can meet with them, go to a restaurant, hang out. So, how can you still develop strong relationships in an era of virtual social life?
It's an interesting question. I mean, to me, eventually we're going to have to go partially back to face meetings. I mean, business is about people. It's about personal relationships. It's not about business. You do business with people you like and people you trust. And it's hard for me, hard for all of us, to really trust or like someone through a Zoom square. You got to have a handshake. You got to see them a little drunk at a dinner and
Yeah.
know who they really are. But it's a great question because all of the folks that I'm still in touch with at agencies that I've been talking to, most of the big ones have already decided, have already laid out, SOP, standard operating procedure for the future, where this Zoom is going to be a big part of it. A lot of big ones have declared that they're not going to do one-day travel anymore. For example, we used to fly from New York to Chicago, have a meeting that night, fly back to New York. That'll never happen again because it's not good for the margin. It's not profitable. You can get business done through Zoom, but I'm not sure you can develop the 10-year, 15, 20-year long lasting business relationships that happen through Zoom. So while we're all going to have to get used to this sticking around, and it will, we're never going back to the way it was. There'll always be this sort of virtual hybrid model. Um, Now we have to set our minds, I think, to finding out where are those sweet spots, those touch points where we can be human together and develop the relationship that in turn turns into a true business partnership.
That's awesome, and I feel like that was one of the biggest problems when I started working in advertising this year versus when I was an intern last year in Chicago, same company, is that I didn't have the human interaction with people anymore in person. And for me, a lot of the agency life was meeting the people. It was like you said, maybe 20% of the time, I was doing my job and I was doing it really well, but then 80% of the time you have to talk to different cities to let you for them to let you on their projects. You gotta pitch yourself to make sure you get a job next year. It was a lot. I loved that game sort of, but I realized that once it got down to the down and dirty, and I was behind a screen and I was not with people anymore, and I just had to send email campaigns and other labels on packaging and stuff. It wasn't the same. It wasn't like I could shoot the shit with somebody and then go do my job. It's a different feeling, but I definitely feel like we're going to move towards a hybrid mode, and I'm cool with that. I don't feel like we need to like commute every day, but I do feel like in order to build a relationship, you have to go out of your way to that effort. I think that's what you like from now on. Yes, you're not going to be able to meet us often, but when you do meet with somebody, it's going to mean, oh, I really care about this person because through all this, I choose to meet with you. So I think it's a double sided. Now, you've been a speaker, film producer, director, writer. Like I could go on the whole day. You're now a professor at the SCAD. At SCAD, you were my professor at the Savannah College of Art and Design too. You have a lot of talent. You had a lot of vision, and I want to talk about a pattern that I see again in creative people, which is we have a million ideas. We want to turn every single one of them into reality. We're like, oh, I could write this. Oh, I could make a little movie about that. Oh, I could. What if I wrote an article for the New York or whatever? We focus so much on getting all those to life that we cannot even materialize a single one. We get lost. How did you manage to do it? Because you're one of those people that took your vision and made it reality, your various visions. Were you always like that, or was it different when you started out?
It's an interesting question. Everyone's a little different in the way they approach the realization, the manifestation of whatever ideas they have. I'm one of those people who thinks that very gut driven, right? Intuition. And so if I have an idea, I'll start making whatever the idea is. Let's say it's a movie. I might sit down and start writing a treatment. And if it's a bad idea for a movie or an idea that really isn't blowing my skirt up, by page 2 of that treatment, I find myself not sitting down at the computer to write anymore. I'm doing something else. And it occurs to me, oh, you're not really passionate about that idea, and it goes to the wayside. Uh, if it's an idea, if I sit down to write that treatment, it is a story I'm passionate about. I realize that by page 2 also when I'm, watching Game of Thrones and decide, I'm going to turn this off and go do a little writing. And I want to go and do it. Then those are the ones that I was going to say chase down, but that's not, they're the ones that chase me down and bring me to them uh, and help me complete them. And the other part of that equation is other people, right? I mean, most of the creative industries require collaboration. And I'm a macro thinker. I see big picture, top line, vision type things. I do that well. I do details really poorly, as evidenced by the fact that I was 40 minutes late to this recording.
Don't worry.
Um, but and so you rely on other people too, right? Feedback from people you trust. I'm not sure that's a great idea, dude. Maybe move on to something else. And you don't make decisions based solely on feedback. Of course, you've got to go with your heart and your mind. But you listen. And when you find yourself a few folks that you trust who are micro thinkers, who get the details, who understand sort of the planning of manifesting a creative idea, then they're a lot of help too. But your gut will tell you once you sit down and start really go about trying to make the idea happen, whether it's one you want to invest in or not.
That's interesting. And you also kind of went into your creative process a bit, like you gave us a glimpse of a creative process. Do you have some sort of routine when you either sit down and write or sit down and create something or whatever you have to do? Do you have some sort of routine or ritual, I might call it, that gets you into that flow state?
Um, it's really different every time. In terms of where am I working? Sometimes I find myself working out on the terrace. I need to be outside for whatever reason. Sometimes I don't, but the few consistents are if I'm sitting down to really do the creation, the making, like whether it's a script, a first version of a script, or a first draft of something. I always not necessarily meditate right before, but sit down before I open up the program or whatever it is I'm going to use. I get very still and just kind of go into myself and try to silence the outside world. Stop worrying about uh, all the stuff that's going on. That I need to go get these things at the grocery. I'm out of dog food, all of that stuff, and make my singular focus that task before me. But other than that sort of meditative bit at the front, it's always different. And the way I sort of select how it's different or how I'm going to do it is, again, for me anyway, almost exclusively gut intuition based. I just kind of go where it feels good and avoid where it feels bad.
So you play between intuition and control a bit, like when you control, when you let go of the mind and let it do its thing. Is that what you're saying more or less?
Yeah, in fact, control, when you first said control, I thought, I'm not sure control is it. But it is. Creativity, the great hallmark of a good creative, whether I'm hiring them for film or for advertising or for anything else, is someone who has something to say, a unique personal perspective, and has something to say. And so, if you're really onto a good idea, if you're truly in a creative state, you're not in control. The creativity is, the idea is, and allowing it to lead you is the best possible thing you can do. Yeah.
So we could say that the people who are most open to change and most open to letting go of control could essentially have an easier time not creating but coming up with ideas and doing that what they love, right?
I think that's fair. I mean, at least in the context of creative work, you don't want to let go of control absolutely in all
Right.
areas of life. But yeah, I think that's fair to say. Yeah.
Yeah, I like what I was thinking is people keep talking about balancing this and that, and I don't know if creativity is so much of a balance as an imbalance, more so, because when you're creative and time passes, you forget to eat, you forget to drink, you forget to talk to the people are passing behind me sometimes, and I will not hear anybody for the whole day. So it's when people say, yeah, you need a balance, you need a healthy balance. I don't think it is. What I think it is you go into a sort of imbalance for a while. You accept that you're gonna give up part of your time, soul, emotion, money, nerves, and then later on, you build it back up with meditation, mental wellness, rest, and all that. That's at least how I go out and see creativity. I don't go out and I'm gonna create this copy, but I'm gonna be mentally okay at the same time. No, I'm gonna get mad. I'm gonna get curious. Is it that similar to
Yeah.
you?
No, that's it. Yeah. And let's say I'm working on a big campaign for a client and it's 18-hour days for 3 months. I'll have friends and family members texting me, "Where the hell are you? Everything okay? Why aren't we?" You know, and by the end of the 2.5, 3 months, some of them are upset with me. But then once that 2 months, 3 months of 18-hour days is over, you do 5-hour days, maybe take Fridays off here and there, spend a lot of time with family, spend a lot of time with friends, and it's neither good nor bad. But you're right, it is this sort of, it is in balance, but never at the same time, right? In the aggregate, it balances out. Um, but creativity, the need to say what it is you have to say, is a jealous mistress, and doesn't allow you to do a whole lot while you're saying that, while you're saying whatever it is.
And you've expressed your creativity in many ways, and those messages that you sometimes get, I've seen them translated into you making movies, into you acting, making campaigns. How is it different to be working as a film producer, for instance, rather than it is to be working as an admin, if there is a lot of differences? And what is it that you like particularly about each of those fields?
Um, the similarities are uh, the collaboration, right? I mean, you go on a film set and there's anywhere from 30 to 300 people, every one of them essential in making it happen. The same with an ad campaign. You may not be on set, even, something like a social media carousel requires a team of 50 people to get it to market in a way that's effective. And so I love that the collaboration, not only the exchange of ideas and the way that in a sort of friendly, competitive manner, we all elevate each other, but also the trust that's required. I have to trust that the copy or the design that I create is executed right on the production end. If it's something print, I have to trust that the print producer is going to make sure that the way I see it is the way it comes out on the paper. And it's nice to be able to trust people in life. You don't often have reason to do so. So that's warm in a way. Uh, there aren't a whole lot of differences between uh, creative endeavors, film, advertising. The one perhaps outlier is writing. If you're writing an article, writing a book, that comes in sort of solitary moments. You, the writer, sit down and you get the work done, and then only after you've said what you have to say do you get to collaborate with an editor and that kind of thing. But story, at the end of the day, is the through line for all of it. And ever since I could hear, I've loved to hear a good story, and ever since I could talk, I've loved to tell one. So it's joyful.
And I guess that storytelling also comes through to some of the movies that you've made and some of the movies that you've produced. A lot of the people see produced by at the beginning of the movie, and they don't really know what a producer does. They're like, "Oh, there's the guy who pays." I know that's basically what it is, but I know that you are also in charge of other things. What kind of roles did you have as a producer in the movies? Like, how cool did you get to be like in these movies? What roles did you get? Um, Not as an actor, but just as an influencer within the whole project.
Yeah, and you're not alone. I think really no one outside of the film business understands what a producer does. The first thing I always say when people ask, what does a producer do? Is if you watch the Academy Awards, the most important award, the one that they give at the very end, is Best Picture. And most people don't notice this until you tell them, but when they award Best Picture, it's not the director that goes and receives the award. It's not the Hollywood star that goes to receive the award. It's the producer. And the reason for that is that it's the producer's vision generally. The producer is usually the one who selects the material, whether that's a book or whatever it is, then hires the screenwriter, a screenwriter of their choice, then gives script notes until the screenplay is where they want it to be, and then hires a director and then oversees casting. And so it's really the producer is the sculptor of the whole film from the moment it's nothing but a big, ugly, heavy marble block to the moment that it's a beautiful piece of art at the end. No one else has the influence over a piece of cinema the way a producer does, creative and financial. Uh, the money part is just a small part of it.
It fascinates me how every single one of the leadership positions that you undertook were very complex. Like, they're not jobs that require one or two things. It's not just like, okay, I'm going to lead a team of creatives and that's it. No, you're actually taking decisions. In movie, like, when you're a producer, you do all that. When you're a news editor, you got to do a lot more. When you're in charge of an entire campaign for an LVMH brand, that's all the package that comes with that. And now you're a professor. And I think you've told me that you've never been busier than when you've been a professor at the university. How is that? Like, how is going from dealing with multinational brands and that stress to dealing with the stress of a organizational institution, an educational institution, and teaching rather than leading, which is similar, but how can you talk to that?
Um, I mean, taking the last bit of your question first and the first part last, it wasn't until I started teaching at SCAD that I realized teaching is really what I've always been doing. As a creative director, you're basically a teacher. Um, but I think SCAD is unique. I'm not sure every professor on the planet is as busy as a SCAD professor. Um, but the chair work, right? Being a chair in addition to teaching is, all the administrative stuff that goes along with it. Um, but it's all kind of the same, which is what's remarkable to me. I had no intention or knowledge each time I moved from one industry to the next that that I was moving into essentially the same thing, which is the management of people, the direction of a group of people toward a single vision, usually a creative vision. And whether you're in movies or advertising or chairing a department at a university, it's all the same. You have to be a good leader, whatever that means to you and to the people you're leading, and you have to have a vision toward which to lead them. And both are extremely rewarding. Uh, teaching students in a classroom is by far the most rewarding thing I've ever done. Better than any award or any paycheck I've ever gotten for sure.
It was cool. Like the quarter that I took, you I had three classes back to back, and that meant 2 hours and a half, 7 hours and a half straight of college every day.
Yeah. Ugh. Yeah.
And you were my first class in the morning, and I remember the two things that I'll remember you saying is story, pitch, and like I saw you like through that class develop as a professor too. Like you start out, you're like, okay, let's see what these guys do, and then you're like, came midterm came and we presented, and you're like, oh, okay, this they need more. Like I could see, I love seeing and analyzing people doing their jobs because I can like see their wheels going. Like when we presented midterm and we presented our Chanel presentation, which had no insight, you were like, hey, this is not right. And I was like, oh, damn, I remember agency days, this is like an agency now. And you created that environment in the classroom where it worked like an agency. We did sprints, we did campaigns on top of campaigns, and we did a huge 10-week campaign which mimicked real life. Do you still like do similar things? Do you still do those big campaigns? And how do you think that teaching advertising, and that's really the question that I'm getting to, how do you think that teaching advertising is going to change? What are the responsibilities that you gotta teach these young kids going into the industry today?
God, that's a good question. I mean, teaching advertising is, I think, to use that phrase, misleading from the get go. I'm not sure you can teach advertising. You can teach the history of advertising. You can teach, how to be critical of it if someone wanted to be, a writer for Ad Age or something. But to be a great advertising creative, you have to be, again, a leader. You have to have uh, passion. You have to have something to say. And those are things you can't really teach. People either come in to a classroom with the raw material uh, to make beautiful, meaningful things and to lead people, or they don't. So the way that I look at teaching advertising, so-called teaching advertising, is primarily to help a student develop confidence in themselves, to recognize that they not only do they have something to say, but they have the talent to say it, and more importantly, that what they have to say is important and it needs to be said, and people need to hear it. So that's part of it. And then there's the fundamentals, right? Uh, there are certain aspects of good writing or good design that will forever be constant, and you can teach those story. But at the end of the day, your task teaching advertising, one's task teaching advertising is really just to lift the student into a space where they recognize that they can, and not only that they can, but that it's important that they do what they're passionate
And I guess the reason why I'm asking that is because I know that the next generation is going to have to deal with stuff like brands and politics merging heavily. Um, society standards changing. Like, I mean, there's a whole new, if there was a monster before, it's a whole new monster coming. And I know that you've worked on presidential campaigns before, and I know that with everything going on in the United States today, there's a lot of conflict. There's It's elevating to scales we've never seen before. There's censorship, there's riots, racism, fake news, division, and a lot of manipulation. But this is not this has not been happening for 4 or 5 years. This has been going on for a long time, and you know best. And my question is today, based on how many data points big corporations have on us, what power do marketing, PR, and advertising agencies have over a nation come election time?
Uh, that's a big and great question. And I often wonder, am I indirectly or even directly responsible in some way for some of the stuff that goes on? Um, but your question, I think, has to be sort of bifurcated, right? Split into two. There are the advertising and marketing people who have a moral compass and values and recognize that most things in life are more important than money and status. And then there are, and that goes for every human being, but people in marketing and advertising who think that the win, right? Making the best campaign, making the most money, getting the biggest award is paramount. And to those of us that recognize the important things in life, we have big questions before us. I mean, you referred to division, riots, polarization. Most of that can be traced to social media. We know and knew when social media was being originated, when it was nascent. I was involved in certain ways in the sort of explosion of that into the cultural and human landscape. And we knew even then that we were using methods of enticing people to the platforms that played on the weakest and saddest and most disappointing pieces of human nature: addiction, uh, the need to be affirmed and recognized. Um, and so, long-winded answer trying to get to the point. Those of us with a moral compass have big decisions to make, because one choice could be to no longer use social media as an advertising platform. But you're talking about who knows how many billions or trillions of dollars lost, control lost. But we know from the last two elections that with the right amount of money and the right data, you can decide. A single person with the right amount of money and the right data can decide who's the president of the United States, uh, can incite a riot. And that's terrifying. Something has to be done. What that is will ultimately come down to not just, I mean, all of us, every industry, every person. Um, but it's a huge, big blob of an issue that's opaque and really difficult to see into. Um, and so I'm not sure I know the answer, but I know big, painful change is going to be required to fix it.
Yeah, because it doesn't seem like there's any other way where presidential campaigns or big brands can even succeed anymore without social media, because of the amount of influence that they have on people. So I feel like you said there has to be a big change that has to do with more than social media, more than, it has to be like a human level change, and then everything else will change. But I doubt that I doubt that presidential campaigns will stop doing social media, and I doubt that bots are gonna stop, hundreds of thousands of bots commenting on stuff. Like I've read all of the different tactics, and it's crazy how a company, do you still think that a company can play the social media game fairly and win, or do you think that companies are gonna have to walk the line between what's right and what's wrong in order to get to their desired result, which sometimes is they can believe that our president, the one that we're doing the campaign for, that's the one that should win. Sometimes people believe that, sometimes people don't. So do you think that they can still compete with other campaigns that are just doing everything they can? Can we do it morally right, or can we not do it morally right today?
I mean, that's a gray area, right? Because most people, even people who are doing it morally wrong, as far as you and I would be concerned, in their own heads, think they're doing it right. They think they're entitled somehow, or that it's okay, or because candidate X is so much better than candidate Y in their opinion, cheating by buying data, buying social media, whatever, is okay because ultimately it's for the greater good, whether it is or not. And so, first of all, that perspective, that origin point is problematic. What I think is right, good, and moral may not be what you think is right, good, and moral. We know that we can do it without social media because we did it for decades before social media ever existed. It's just that social media is efficient. You can segment to a level where you're almost delivering a different message to every different individual prospective consumer, and that's, I mean, imagine the CMO of LVMH being able to visit every single prospective consumer and convince them personally to go and buy a Louis Vuitton duffel bag. I mean, that's powerful, and it's cheap. And ultimately, it comes down to money, right? Um, and I don't know that the change we need happens on a social level. There's a big part of me that thinks, and government rarely, our government anyway, rarely does this uh, because it's an American value for government for the most part to be laissez-faire, hands off, right? But I'm not sure without forced regulation we get to a solution. And at least right now, every company that had Facebook is the big example. They're American corporations, and so it's the United States government that has power over them. And so whatever the answer is has to start here. But we know we can do it without social media. We've done it before. Most of advertising history has been done without social media.
When I say also social media, I mean social media is the best way to gather 5,000 something points of key points about every single US voter. And this is what we're talking about. We're talking about data, basically. This is about what we're willing to give out and what we're willing to not give out. And until now, we were made to believe that our data is just simple as accept terms and agreement, or allow this app to connect to Facebook. And until now, we've practically given a big chunk of our data away. But what people realize is they think, oh, that's it, I cannot do anything else about it now, where it's not true. You can just like tap on report every single ad that you're served and it will throw off the whole thing. My question is do you think there's a future where our data is going to be super valuable, and we're going to be in a world where in order for brands to get access to our data, they're going to have to either pay us or recompensate us in some other way?
I think we're past that. And I think we as the individual missed the opportunity to monetize our own information. What's happened is Google, Facebook, etc., figured out how to monetize our own information, and they're the ones who made the killing on it. And we're even past the point, I think, where data is the most valuable thing. It used to be, I don't know, let's start with gold. Gold was the great commodity. And then suddenly it was oil was the great commodity. And then it was data. And now it's our own attention. They use data to get it, but what Facebook is selling is not ad space per se. They're selling our attention, right? In the way that NBC used to sell 30 seconds of my attention to whomever bought the TV spot. And so the attention of the individual human has become the great commodity, and we're too late, I think, to make money off of our own uh, data. And it will never go away, right? It's like all things internet. Once it's on there, it exists forever. Even the companies like, take Cambridge Analytica, for example, who uh, sort of claim to have destroyed certain pieces of ill-gotten, ill-collected data, almost certainly haven't. They live in some underground server farm in the, you know,
Yeah.
middle of Arizona. and people are still using it. Uh, and they, fundamentally, we don't change much. What we're driven by will be the same for the most part in 10 years as it is today. And so what they've already got, even if it were, data was forced to stop being collected, they've already got a yoke around our neck and can steer us where they want us.
It's interesting. There's one country that I was researching countries in Europe. Estonia in Europe actually has a different system in which every citizen has a number like your social security number. It's an ID that's not secret. You cannot do anything with that ID but identify, okay, that's this person.
Mm-hmm.
And all your data is stored in that ID. Now, the government supposedly does not have access to any of that, and you select how much of that data, including your bank accounts, where you live, like everything, you choose how much of that you want to share with the government, apart from bills and all that. But even the
Hmm.
companies that you give your data to are not allowed to do anything with the data or give it to somebody else. So essentially, you're in a system where the more data you give, the better service you do get. So it's not like, hey, you own your data and it's cool. You own your data and it comes with like sort of a responsibility. And it's the same on the apps on Google. Okay, you don't want to share your location with us or you don't want to share that with us, you cannot use maps. You cannot get to where
Yeah.
you want if you don't share your location with us. Oh, you want to log into Facebook? You got to make sure that we know where you logged in from. Like, and not only that, like there's so many different things, and it's just crazy. I don't. I think that the system is set in such a way that you cannot enjoy all the benefits unless you give up that data from you. So I agree with you. I don't. I think we're way past that. Way past
Well, and what you said is also brings up some great points. I don't want to come off as a cynic because I'm actually not. I'm probably being overly idealistic, maybe one of my tragic flaws. But that it was the origin of data, right? Good people saying, well, the more we can find out about you, the more relevant we can make the content for you. We don't want to serve you a bunch of content you don't care about, and you don't want to be served a bunch of content you don't care about. Let's work together and make it so that your feed is exactly what you need to know, what you want to know. Somewhere along the line, that got totally hijacked and bastardized by commerce, and data is no longer about what's relevant to us. It's about what's relevant to whomever is selling us stuff. Um, so you're right. I mean, we're totally past. I don't know that we're past the point of no return. We can solve the problem, but it'll be painful. I mean, whatever change we have to make will be painful, although far less painful than the ultimate outcome if we continue down this road.
right. And do you think it starts with informing people? Because most people don't know where their data is even going or where data is being extracted from.
Yes, definitely with informing people, and uh, in particular with informing them about the severity of the problem. I don't think people realize uh, that the well, you mentioned riots and polarization, and that violence and fear and hatred and all the stuff that goes along with that is by and large cultivated by parties interested in those qualities via social media. Um, I am less afraid of the next generation, uh, dying excruciatingly on a planet that's being burnt up by the sun, and more afraid of the next generations dying on a planet at each other's hands, because diversity, understanding, seeking to empathize with people that are not like you is totally devoid, becoming totally devoid from our online experience. Uh, by choice, by the choice of the people who can afford to make it so. All we hear on social media is that which we already agree with. And that's a terrible, fearful way to exist.
There's a principle, and I'm going to be wrong about this because I don't remember the exact number, but there's a principle in world government and world leadership where it says that if you manage to control around 17% of the people of a group, then those 17% are going to do the job for you and spread the rest of it out. So I feel like people think of it as like, yeah, but I'm not I'm not looking at biased news, or I'm not being manipulated. Yes, you are. And
Yes.
we're not. How can you be aware? How can you prevent, apart from looking from two to three different sources, which nobody does because everyone's lazy. Like, most of the people read a headline and they're like, yep, I'm going to believe that, and I'm going to take that into my day and act upon it. How can we, apart from doing more research, which apparently some people don't want to do, how can we as advertisers make sure, or not even as advertisers, as creative people, make sure that people learn about the consequences that all of this has?
I mean, I think the first and best thing we can do is educate our clients, right? Clients who want a certain outcome or suggest a certain tactic that is questionable, or who feel like certain potentially dangerous channels like social media need to be the epicenter of their campaigns. We should educate them and say, maybe it's an option. Here are some of the potential benefits of that option, but here are some of the drawbacks, and one of those drawbacks is big. Social media may be destroying the fabric of humanity. Um, but you're right. I don't remember if it's 17%, and I can't remember what that phenomenon is called. But it's true, and we saw it in pre-World War II Germany. We've seen it in the United States since the United States was incepted up until this day. Um, and you use the analogy of people saying, "Well, I'm not being manipulated." Of course you are. The sort of racial strife in America is a great example of that.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not a racist, but yes, you are. We all are to some degree, and we have to want to change. And you said people don't want to research. We have to. We have to want to change enough to invest the time, the energy, and the pain, frankly, that is required to realize that we're approaching something from the wrong space, and need to alter it. Um, but it's big. I mean, I don't even know where we would begin. Probably here, right? I mean, maybe that's one of the silver linings of the social media phenomenon and everything we're talking about, is that polarization is forcing a lot of us to see, using racism in America as an example. Polarization is forcing a lot of us to see it, to make it, to draw it into relief, and for us to recognize, yes, of course it still exists. Now let's do something about it. Horrible events, violence, oftentimes is what it takes for a collective group of humans to realize something's wrong, and then we do something about it. But sometimes that's the silver lining.
Yeah, like that was my principle. 20% of the people are enough to convince the rest. Just like in a company, and you know that in an agency, 20% of the people put the work in, 80% are props.
20/80, that ratio
That's what
exists
I heard right
everywhere.
now.
Like,
Yeah, that's what I
I
heard right now.
mean, there's a 20/80. Listen 80% of the time, speak 20% of the time. I mean, all kinds. And there's something sort of magical about that ratio. And you're right. I mean, yeah, 20% of the people do all the heavy lifting.
I'm going towards the end. I know you're busy. I just wanted to tell you that you mentioned something interesting, which is people don't want, like I said, people don't want to read and they need to like inform themselves. The problem is, what happens when you send everybody home and you break their ties with real life, and you're like, here's the channels you're going to receive news from and social media. And yes, you can choose. And I'm not saying that because people are staying at home, people are less educated now than they were before, or anything like that. But before, you used to meet up with a lot of people, and these other people, sometimes on the screen, they're different than in real life. In real life, they will tell you like it is, and on a screen, they'll be like trolls. I don't know if people can even inform themselves on what's real and what's not real anymore, because of, we think that we have so many news channels today, when in fact we've been cut down the sources of information that we can actually trust. Not the ones that we have and we can use, the ones that we can actually trust. Because news isn't news anymore today. It's making sure that you can sell ads, keep people for the longest time on the screen, so the next ad in the commercial break is gonna get you more money. This is where I'm scared of news and ads and ad brands. I mean, advertising agencies getting brands into political issues. And it's important. People expect brands to align with their political views nowadays. This is crazy. As a brand, not only do you have to align with human qualities, but you also have to appeal to the political party that a person agrees with. And the saddest truth, and there's no question after this, so don't worry about keeping up. The saddest truth about it all for me is the fact that at the end of the day, we ended up more split up than before. And all these brands are actually playing in with the polar opposites of the political party. So they're taking either side, knowing that no matter what side they take, there's going to be supporters on there.
Yeah,
It's
and
scary.
I mean, that's what a wise, I say wise, a commercially wise corporation does is if you give the Republicans 200 grand, you got to give the Democrats 200 grand, and then whoever's in office doesn't matter, right? Um, but I think in your statement, there's one issue sort of with premise that uh, we don't get real life online. We don't get real life outside. I mean, your question is frank, a little terrifying because it's true. There is nowhere online really to get a unbiased opinion anymore. What you have to do, I think, is mix those opinions, right? So since Trump was elected, I've avoided the news until election night, where instead of watching, let's say, CNN, which maybe is who I would normally watch, I chose to watch Fox News because I wanted to see what the other side, at least the other side from me, was saying. And so you kind of have to, you can't go anywhere for the truth anymore. You're right. You have to take this highly polarized thing on the right and this highly polarized thing on the left and try to find your own middle ground. Maybe is the best we can do now.
Yeah, it's I call them people that like guns and weed. And I know it's like what do you do with those people, you know? What do you do with people that like guns and weed, you know? That's what it is.
My brother is one of those people, and yeah, he's an enigma to me too.
Yeah. So listen, I have one last question for you, and I want to leave off with this because at the end of the day, I'm doing all this for people to also learn because I think what we're talking about here is crucial, and this is informing people, and this is doing what we're talking about. So if you had a piece of advice for the young creatives going into communications, entertainment, marketing, what would it be for them today?
I mean, it sounds a little cliche and tropey, but at the end of the day, it's the truth. There are an infinite number of mistakes we can make as humans going through life. But I think the biggest one is to live in a way that is not congruent with our soul, right? With what we believe in, what we love. And every day we're faced with an infinite number of choices to either live in congruency with our values and our soul, whatever that word means, or to not. And the decisions that we regret most are the ones where the decision takes us as far away as you can get from who you really are. And so, to anyone, an advertising student or otherwise, I would say, you know, follow your heart for lack of being able to find an even more cliche statement, but it's true. We know, right? I mean that what the yogis would call your small inner voice, it tells you, you know when you're about to make a decision that's going to mess with your life, mess with your conscience, mess with your joy, your contentment. Um, so we have advance notice. Just listen to it and do what you love. If you're doing what you love, it's real hard to do anything bad, to do anything sinister, to even accidentally. If you're doing what you love, all things sort of seem to fall into place. So be honest with yourself and do what you love.
I keep saying that. I keep saying tune into yourself, and with a bit of love, everything can be solved. And it sounds like you say cliche and optimistic and hippie or whatever, but I think that is the truth. I really think that's the truth. That if we can see, I said that if you could get Republicans and Democrats to sit down at a table and have a beer or tea or whatever they want to have and talk about the differences, they'll be like, "Holy shit, we gotta kill everybody in the media because we actually agree on a lot of things, but because of what we're being told." we're not. So I feel like if we could get rid of the news, sit down at a table and have a nice barbecue or vegetarian or whatever you want to eat and discuss, hey, I feel like black people are being targeted by the system. And then they'll be like, I believe that is not true. Okay, let's see. But you cannot get 7 billion people to sit down and talk about it that way. You know, I wish we could. I
Right.
wish we could, everybody could tune in and be like, hey, I'm actually not different from you. I'm not that different. We're like kind of the same thing. Like you said, creativity is a collaborative world. You couldn't have done the stuff that you could have done. I couldn't have done the stuff that I did without people around you, without people to buy your stuff, without people to help you. So what are we talk why are we so spread out? Why are we so divided and mad at each other if we cannot really coexist? I mean, we cannot exist without each other, you know?
Amen. I mean, life is collaborative, right? The single greatest human need is to connect with another human being. Um, you're spot on. That's all there is to say. Yes, if only we could. Um, and I think we'll find a way out. I just don't have any direction, any idea of what direction that way will be or what that way will look like. But we'll find a way out. Humanity always does.
It does. And I'm very hopeful because there's still people like you who are in, high position of leadership who can still make those changes and lay the groundwork for us to continue that work whenever we get to a position of more power and more influence and more leadership and more experience. So thank you for coming in today and thank you for taking your time. This was awesome. Honestly, this was one of the best conversations I've had on any podcast, and I can't wait to see what kind of value it brings to people.
Cool, man. I appreciate it. Yeah, I've had a blast. Good talking with you. And I'll just say, as for my end, uh, I appreciate your kind words, but far more important than me or anyone else who's in a position of power now is you all, your age, who care about the right things, who see what's actually important in life, and who are going to be the leaders of tomorrow. I'm grateful for you all. So keep it up.
Thank you so much. Hey, have an incredible day. And thank you so much one more time for coming on. Take care and have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Have a good one.